you very much. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to you and Ranking Member and the members of the Rules Committee. H.R. 4 is just another attempt to exert federal control over states and localities. It's a partisan power grab. In 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act to overcome pervasive state resistance and barriers that prevented minorities from exercising their right to vote. In 2013, the Supreme Court in Shelby County versus Holder held that continuing to require states to, quote, pre-clear election law changes based upon conduct from decades ago was an unconstitutional invasion of state sovereignty. The court recognized that, quote, the conditions that originally justified these measures no longer characterize voting in the covered jurisdictions. And that's a good thing. It means we've made progress. I mean, we should frankly be celebrating the amazing changes from what was happening, the wrong things that were happening in the 60s compared to where we are today with our voting laws. The court also found that if Congress drafts a new coverage formula, quote, exceptional conditions must exist to justify the extraordinary departure from the traditional course of relations between the states and the federal government. Thankfully, America of 2021 is not America of 1965. As I said, despite what Democrats want everyone to believe, these exceptional conditions do not exist. There is no recent record of rampant voter suppression or discrimination. In fact, minority participation in elections today is exceptionally better than it was in 1965. And during the 2020 election, voter turnout was higher across all racial groups. In fact, from the Shelby County decision, Chief Justice Roberts said, black voter registration before the VRA in Mississippi was 6.4%. Today, or actually in 2004, I'm sure it's higher today, 2004, 76.1%, higher than among white voters in the state of Mississippi. That's what you call progress. That's a good thing. We should celebrate that. Regardless of the data and the Supreme Court precedent, the Democrats still insist that a pre-clearance regime is necessary. The latest version of H.R. 4 is a federal takeover of elections contrary to the Constitution's clear intention. H.R. 4 includes a new coverage formula that would allow federal court to retain jurisdiction over state or political subdivision for 10 years if as few as 3 voting rights violations had occurred over the last 25. But H.R. 4 also takes a novel approach to determining and defining what's a violation, where a state or political subdivision can rack up voting, quote, voting rights violations without any final court judgment of discrimination. Someone just brings a claim. There might be some kind of settlement because the state or the local jurisdiction that doesn't want to spend taxpayer dollars or whatever and go through a court decision, and that's going to be tallied up as a violation. Instead of settlement agreements and consent decrees in addition to court orders and objections by the Attorney General will suffice to trigger a violation designation. Let's be honest, the real aim of this provision is to utilize the pre-clearance process to allow the Democrats' political allies at the Department of Justice and other left-wing organizations to control state election rules in violations of the principles of federalism. H.R. 4's practice-based coverage provision doubles down on the unconstitutional pre-clearance formula. This provision is designed to target popular voter integrity measures by requiring every state and political subdivision to pre-clear certain election practices, including changes to voter identification requirements and changes to voter registration list maintenance processes with the Department of Justice. A recent poll found 81% of Americans support voter identification laws, but Democrats still want the Department of Justice to weigh in on this. Additionally, this bill creates a new extraordinary legal standard for courts to grant injunctive relief if the Voting Rights Act-related actions and impose burdensome reporting requirements on states and localities. H.R. 4, as introduced in the 117th Congress, includes a rewrite of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in response to the Supreme Court's July 2021 decision in Brnovich versus the Democrat National Committee. Justice Alito, writing for the court, found that, quote, equal openness of election procedures remains the touchstone in establishing whether there is a violation of Section 2, and he set out a non-exhaustive list of factors for courts to examine during its totality of the circumstances review. The Democrats didn't hide the ball with this one. They specifically wrote in H.R. 4 that courts may not consider any of the factors Justice Alito laid out in his opinion. To justify the unconstitutional federal reach of H.R. 4, Democrats have argued that states have enacted allegedly suppressive voting laws. This is not the case. It's simply not true. It's easier today for eligible Americans to vote than ever before in our nation's history. Voting remains a fundamental, constitutionally protected right in this country, and Republicans want every eligible citizen to vote and every legal ballot to count. but Democrats and their allies in this administration want to politicize the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. Look no further than the recent actions from the Justice Department. In 2020, we all know about this because it happened in several of our states. In 2020, state and local governments were tasked with administering elections in a safe manner during a once-in-a-lifetime virus. Many states adopted temporary voting procedures to reduce public health concerns, sometimes in a manner that I clearly believe violated Article 2 of the Constitution, despite prominent public health officials saying that in-person voting was safe. But this administration is now telling states that if they want to return to the election procedures they had just 18 months ago, in some cases just a year ago, they could face litigation from the Justice Department. And this same Justice Department, the Biden Justice Department, is refusing to say whether it would review the process by which some states adopted the measures in the first place. So you can only ratchet one way here, according to the Biden Justice Department. And now we see the Biden Justice Department suing states that are trying to improve election administration by implementing voting integrity measures. What's telling, however, is that the Biden Justice Department is targeting only Republican-led states and ignoring Democrat-led states. Imagine that. Such as President Biden's home state of Delaware, that has more restrictive election administration laws than several of the states that have been in the news and have been targeted by this Justice Department. These changes in Republican-led states seek to not only enhance election integrity, but also increase the public's confidence in the election process. This is exactly how our country's voting system was set up to work. States and localities analyze what worked for them during the past election and then make changes accordingly. They do not need bureaucrats in Washington telling them how they should run their election. North Carolina's Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson said it best when he testified before the Judiciary Committee. As the chairman indicated, we've had a number of hearings. Mr. Robinson said this: "We need to stop this. The insinuation that somehow the people in Washington, D.C. know better than the people in North Carolina. You do not, and we will not tolerate it." End of his quote. We need to put an end to these partisan federal power grabs. States are the entities best situated to administer elections within their jurisdiction. I urge the committee to adopt an open rule on this legislation so Republicans can amend it to reflect the realities on the ground and not what's